You're listening to Halftime with your host, Mylan Bittenbender, where each week we take a few minutes to step off the field of life and discuss the challenges and joys of navigating life in the middle years. I hope your time with us today will help you develop your strategy for a winning second half. Welcome to the locker room. You're among friends.
Hey, everybody. Today, my guest is Dan Webster. Dan is my own personal coach. He was there for me when I was really going through some of my own midlife stuff, helping me figure stuff out, setting a course for moving forward. And in this particular interview, he shares his own story of what happened when he kind of hit his midlife struggle. And in particular, in the way that it affected his career and identity and all of those kinds of things. So fascinating conversation. Dan is a coach to executive leaders, people in ministry. He also works with FCA, does a lot of their training and speaking and things like that. And he's just a fountain of wisdom. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with my guest, Dan Webster, today. I do want to take a moment and just let you know that for whatever reason, the recording, the audio on my particular recording in this show is not great. I'm going to ask you to have some grace with me and some patience as I'm still new to this whole thing and figuring out some of the technical issues. So sorry about the poor audio quality, but I think it's still, I think you'll still be able to follow along and it'll still be good. So great content today. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, Dan, thank you so much for coming and being a guest on Halftime. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Miles. Good to see you.
Good. It's great to see you too. And for anybody that's listening in, Dan is my coach, and I'm excited to have Dan on the show today. Dan and I have been
do 20 push-ups right now if you could. I'm not that kind of coach. I'm sorry.
Not that kind of coach.
All right.
That's right. Dan's been my coach for about 2.5 years, and we've been, well, actually for the first year or so, it was pretty intense coaching, and now we're just good friends, and I'm really enjoying that part of our relationship as well.
Me too.
So, so Dan, for most of my guests, I ask them a little bit about their past, and I think it just kind of sets the stage, gives people a little bit of context. So you are, some of our guests are in midlife. I think maybe you're a step beyond midlife. So a lot of our guests, we talk about the 80s and stuff like that. But for you, when would you say was kind of your coming of age time, or when were you like, when were you in high school?
Sure. Well, I turn 107 next week. So yeah, I graduated from high school in the 60s, which was a crazy time in the United States with the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
That was a big issue, a lot of protests, especially with what's going on now on campuses. It was a little different, but students were certainly as passionate about the Vietnam War. And I didn't have to, get drafted. I had a high draft number, and I was in school, in college, playing basketball. So thankfully, I didn't have to go defend our country and face any of the conscience issues that had to do with the Vietnam War. So, yeah.
I've got to believe for a high schooler or somebody who's getting ready to graduate high school, turning 18, I bet that was all consuming. I'm sure that was something that you guys spent a lot of time thinking about, filling your mind with the thoughts of what might be, right?
Well, at that point, I didn't have a conscience issue. Maybe I wasn't as thoughtful as I could have been about, the morality of the war or any of that kind of thing. I just thought about, my father was a Marine. He hit the beach at Iwo Jima. A third of the men in that assault died. His commanding officer died right in front of him.
Wow.
And I understood the trauma of war, because even as my father grew older, and I was a full-grown man, I would ask him about the Second World War. And it was so traumatic that he wouldn't even talk with me about it, Mylan. And certainly during that time, I'm sure my mother and father were hopeful that I wouldn't have to get drafted and go fight because of the possibility of dying or whatever. And so, I knew that if I was thankfully I had a high draft number, and if I was in school, I had a student deferment. And so, I just put my head down and worked hard in school and played basketball, and ultimately the war, was resolved a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit more about, you said you played basketball. What was high school like besides the political stuff that was going on? What was high school like for you?
Well, when I entered high school as a sophomore, I was 5 feet 5 and weighed 185 pounds. So, as you can imagine, I was on one end of the social continuum. And when I graduated from high school, I was 6'2" and a half and weighed 175 pounds. So, entering high school and going out, my dad was a great athlete. I went out for every sports team as a sophomore, and I didn't make a single team. And one of the really important events in my life was Dr. Messenger, who was my algebra teacher. I went out for sophomore boys basketball team, didn't make it. And he said, "Well, how would you like to manage the team?" And I kind of rolled my eyes. He said, "Well, listen, I'll give you extra credit in algebra, which I could use." So I volunteered to be the manager of the boys' sophomore basketball team. And at that point in Southern California, the sophomore team practiced outside on the asphalt basketball court, and the JV and the varsity practiced inside. And so every day, during that year, if a kid was sick or injured, I would just jump in and I would fill the 5-on-5 so we could have a practice. The very last practice of the year, Dr. Messenger says, "Hey, bag up the balls, come over here. There's a couple things I want to tell you." So I do, and I walk up to him. He says, "First of all, I want you to know, thank you for helping me. You're going to get your extra credit." And I said, "Well, thanks, Doc. I'm grateful for that." And then the second thing he told me, Mylan, this was one of those defining moments in my life as a high school kid. He looked at me and said, "Dan, listen, you have more athletic ability than any kid on this team. Go out for basketball next year." And I'm looking at him thinking, when's the punchline coming? Why are you being so mean? And he said, "Listen, I'm not kidding you. I have watched you all year long. I have seen in practice what I didn't see, when you tried out." And he was so kind. He said, You just haven't hit your adolescent streak. You haven't hit your growth streak yet." The truth of it was your athleticism had hidden under 50 pounds of fat young man, but he didn't say that. And so, between my sophomore and my junior year, Mother Nature hit me with her wand, and I started sprouting up. And I went out for basketball, and he was right. I was co-captain of the team as a junior. We played for a state championship in Southern California as a senior, and then I played at Cypress Junior College and Biola University. And so, how profound was it? What would have happened to my life? I've thought about it. I mean, there's all sorts of things we could talk about here. But if he would have looked at me and thought all that stuff, but never called me over and actually spoken to me, that was incredibly profound. And I think deeply impacted my life, because later on up the road, when I did 20 years of student ministry, I had that memory of the power of speaking into a young person and communicating what they might not see as true about them right now, but is true about them. And then you call them to the life that really is within inside of them. And so that was important. And, junior college, as a senior in high school, obviously going from being a sophomore with really nothing going on socially, just longing for a girl to talk with me, not to ask her out or anything, to as a senior playing on that kind of basketball team and being able to ask anybody out. It was really weird, Mylon. I had another profound moment when we played a team called Hart High School in Fullerton Junior College's gym, the semifinals of the state championship to qualify to go to the Los Angeles Sports Arena. And at the end of that game, I'm the first one out. I'm sitting on the bleachers and I'm watching the janitor sweep up the fallen banners. And this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, man, I'm getting into my car in the bus. We're going to drive back to Catella High School. There'll be 1,500, 2,000 people waiting for us. We'll drive behind the campus and the bus door will open and the Red Sea will part, and we'll walk through those people carrying our gym bag, and they'll all be clapping for us. And I'm thinking it's on the bleacher, and I'm going to put my gym bag down and I'm going to go out and I'm going to take the hand of my 5'8", blonde-haired, green-eyed girlfriend with the body of an aerobics instructor. And I'm going to get into this will sound silly to most people, my tricked out Volkswagen Green Bug, which was really fun back then. And I'm going to drive to her house. And I'm thinking this, and I'm going to kiss her a little more if I'm lucky tonight. And I'm going to prepare for a state championship. And I'm thinking at Fullerton Junior College on the bleachers in the gym, I should be the happiest guy on the planet. And I wasn't. I was empty. And I'm having, as a senior in high school, an existential crisis. And I understand now that it's okay to have a life that is full of a lot of wonderful things, but the only thing that fills, your heart is the love of Jesus Christ. So I set out on my own spiritual journey. I don't remember one authentic Christian kid on my high school campus. I don't remember one authentic ministry like Youth for Christ or anything like that. And so I ended up, through a whole series of circumstances, at a Billy Graham crusade as a senior in high school. And I heard the gospel for the first time in my life. And I went forward, I stood on third base, and everything changed. My whole family came to Christ. When I went to junior college to play basketball, I didn't go to play basketball. I went to share my faith with every one of my teammates. And I shared it with my coach, who eventually came to faith. And we had all year long, we would get in the bus and we would go to all these different games. And I would strategically sit on the aisle next to one of my teammates on the inside, and I shared my faith with every single guy in all sorts of different ways. Only one kid responded. But
let's rewind. Just say, how old were you when that you're talking about in college, right?
Well, I was 17 when I came to Christ, and then I'm 18, 19 in junior college.
Yeah.
Sharing my faith.
So what do you think motivated you to do that? I mean, if you'd never seen that modeled, obviously, God changed your heart. Something big happened there. But what do you think motivated you to share that with everybody else?
I think just the simple fact of how transformational the love of Christ was in my life and what it meant to be forgiven. That center part now of my heart was full. And I found my life becoming more and more integrated as time went on. Between my freshman and sophomore year in college, during that summer, I went back and I visited 3 of the guys I played basketball with, and 2 of them were strung out on drugs, and one of them had a baby and didn't care about it. And so I drove away from those conversations that day, and I'm reflecting in my head. I'm kind of half praying. I'm saying, God, why didn't someone do something to share you with me? I mean, I was your perfect target audience high school kid. I would have been wide open to the gospel if someone had shared it with me. And when I had that thought, I thought, why didn't someone do something like that? It was almost as if God spoke to me and said, yeah, why doesn't someone do something like that? And I kind of smiled and I thought, that was the moment God ruined my life, because I thought I was going to be a doctor. And God said, no, not you, buddy. And so all of those high school experiences were formational for God's call in my life to go ultimately into student ministry. So kind of all fit together.
So Southern California, where in Southern California did you go?
Orange County, Anaheim.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I've been to Anaheim. I was there once for a Youth for Christ conference.
It was in the late 60s, early 70s. Southern California was an awesome place to grow up. Orange groves. Now it's one city from Orange County all the way to San Diego. It's crazy.
Yeah. Did you ever get back there?
Oh yeah, I get back there now and then. Sure. My youngest son lives in San Diego, so I get back there. I'll do my nostalgia tour.
Yeah. We like to do that, don't we? Now, if I go back to my home town, actually where my house stood is hole 9 on a golf course, Angels, I can't remember the name of it now, but Angels Crossing golf course.
Wow.
So anyway, okay, so you came to Christ during your senior year, junior college. You're sharing your faith with anybody and everybody, and you mentioned that you went into youth ministry. Yeah. Well, tell us first about your when did you get married? Was it in that time frame, or how did your family life start similar to your career life time frame, or how was that?
Obviously I spent 2 years in junior college. Then I spent 3 years at Biola University.
Okay.
Because you almost had to have a double major of whatever you majored in and Bible. And so the day that I got married the night before my college graduation.
Oh boy.
So we were young and crazy, and that was quite an experience. I had a lot of smiles on guys as I'm walking around a graduation saying, "Hey, this is my wife. We got married last night," and they would look at me and they would nod, that kind of nonsense.
Oh, yeah. Oh boy. Well, that's a kind of a crazy story. But so you went into youth ministry, and actually, I mean, you have quite a story about your youth ministry career. So, tell us a little bit about how you got into that.
Well,
I know a little bit of it, but I'm not sure how you got into it to begin with.
during my years at Biola, I was attending Garden Grove Community Church. The senior pastor there was Robert Schuler, that eventually became the Crystal Cathedral. And while I was there, when I graduated from college, I got hired to direct the student ministry. The guy who really discipled me while I was in college and serving volunteering in the high school ministry, he ended up going to Mount Hermon in Northern California, and Schuler hired Don, who was the youth choir director, to run the youth ministry. And Don was smart enough to know that I was basically doing the ministry. He would put it, he was a youth choir director. He didn't know how to build a ministry. He'd put his feet on the desk and I'd run the thing. Well, 3 months into uh, his tenure as director of youth ministry there at the church, he was dating Robert Schuler's daughter, Sheila. And he broke up with Sheila and really hurt her. Uh, he was kind of Sheila's first heartbreak, and Schuler fired him the same day. I think banished him to San Jose or something like that. It was awesome. So there were two things there. Number one is then they offered me to direct the student ministry, which was awesome. That was a great opportunity. But number two is I kind of put in the back of my mind, don't mess with Schuler's kids. That might be a short stay for me. So I took over the student ministry and began to thump along. And it wasn't too long before I'm walking down the ramp of our youth center, and a guy says, "Hey, uh, who are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm Dan Webster." He said, "What do you do here?" I said, "Well, I just kind of took over the student ministry." He says, "That's awesome. That's what I do in Chicago." He said, "How many kids do you have in your ministry?" I said, we have probably 60, 70 pretty good kids, maybe 100 at a big event, but 60, 70 is probably, really the right number." And he gave me that pause, like, ask me. So I said, "Well, how many students do you have in your youth ministry in Chicago?" He said, "About 1,100. And I said, "Your church must be huge." He said, "No, our church is about 350, 400 adults." And I said, "Now, what is your name again?" And he said, "Bill Hybels." And so being in California, I said, "Hey, dude, what are you doing for the next half an hour?" So I sat down with Bill, and Bill became an incredible friend and mentor. And I flew back and saw his ministry that was called Sun City. And Bill filled in some of the fundamentals of being a good director of student ministry. I was locked in on some of them, but he was able to teach me, how to structure a ministry for growth. He was able to teach me the evangelism piece. He was able to teach me how to communicate, the truth of Jesus to younger people in a way that was creative and interesting to them. And so Bill accelerated my development as a student pastor. And we retooled our whole student ministry, and the thing grew over the next 5 years to about 850 kids. And then Dr. Schuler built the Crystal Cathedral. And to be honest, uh, I got a little sideways with his fundraising techniques, and I just kind of realized I don't know if I want to raise my family in this environment. And it was at that point that Hybels had launched Willow Creek Community Church. They were a couple years into it, and he invited my wife and I to come back and take over the student ministry, because the guy who was running the student ministry, Don Cousins, wanted to start a college ministry. And so Judy and I in 1981 went back to be part of Willow Creek in the early days. We were kind of part of Willow before it was really Willow. And we spent 11 years there. I spent 10 years directing the student ministry, and had, with the help of just an amazing, group of volunteers and professionals, we built the student ministry to almost 2,000 high school kids, and then another 700 or 800 junior high kids that was run by Scott Peterson, a really wonderful guy. And so, which kind of leads us into midlife, because 10 years in, I'm turning 40 years old, and I'd been doing student ministry for almost 20 years. And I had this horrible experience, which I think we're going to kind of launch into now, midlife, because I walk into the auditorium and there's, I don't know, 1,800 high school kids, and so much energy in the place. You can almost feel it vibrating and the roof rising. And I walk into the auditorium, and if I was honest with myself, I realized, you know what? I don't even want to be here anymore. And it was not, Mylan, a crisis of faith. I hadn't stopped believing in Jesus. I didn't, those weren't the issues. And I didn't hate kids. But what I awakened to was, if I was honest with myself, what has given me life to lead for 20 years now was sucking the life out of me. And I didn't have the wisdom or the understanding to know, okay, what is going on inside of me and how do I sort this out? And what happened is I ended up sitting down with Don Cousins in January of my 10th year. And I said, Don, I'm in trouble and I need to I'll get this thing to June. So that'll complete 10 years of doing this. And I'll hand off the student ministry to a guy that I've trained, Bobo Shears, who was very effective, very skilled. And I need a sabbatical. And thankfully, the church had mercy on me. And I got it to the finish line and they did a little celebration to say thanks. And then I spent 3 months trying to sort out what happened, what went on inside of me. And that's a whole story.
Yeah. So, well, let's rewind just a little bit, though. You dropped a couple of names, Robert Schuller and the Crystal Cathedral,
Right.
Bill Hybels and Willow Creek. And, those are, for those of us in church world, that makes, that means something. That really means something. For some people, it might not. But just to bring, anybody that doesn't mean anything up to speed. The Crystal Cathedral, now, how large would that church have been when you started there? Because you said your student ministry was 60 or 70 kids. How large was the church?
I'm guessing that it was called Garden Grove Community Church at that point. I'm guessing maybe 1,200, somewhere in that neighborhood, possibly. And then probably at the height of the cathedral. Membership was always a challenging thing to try to determine because attendance didn't reflect membership. Because of Schuller's television ministry, The Hour of Power, every single week people would flood in to the church and it would be full, but we don't know how many people were visitors. But I'm guessing, I don't know if I can be totally accurate, but certainly the cathedral probably grew to 3 or 4 or 5,000, by the time I was done.
Yeah, I've always wondered about a church like that. It seems like that would have been fascinating because you wonder how many of those people were there, like you said, on a given Sunday because they watch every week or, they've seen it lots of times and they're in California and it's almost like, a tourist attraction.
It was. It definitely was.
Yeah.
And I mean, buses would pull in full of people on tours and things like that.
Wow.
And, Schuller, in some ways, Schuller's minute, it was like Garden Grove Community Church was a mission. Bob had a tremendous ministry to people that were kind of marginally on the edge of faith, leaning in that direction. And I think Bob took a lot of heat from kind of the more conservative wing of the evangelical church. They felt like he became more anthropologically motivated than biblically motivated. But I think thousands of people came to faith in Jesus at that place. And then they grew to a point because Garden Grove Community Church and the cathedral wasn't really a teaching church, that they would gravitate towards Chuck Swindoll's church in Fullerton, or they would gravitate towards Calvary Chapel's church, Chuck Smith in Costa Mesa, or they'd gravitate towards John MacArthur's church, Grace in LA, where it was more of a teaching environment. But yeah, I had amazing, Bob and Bill Hybels were such different leaders. And I mean, there's a lot to unwind about that whole thing. But Bob gave me the opportunity. I'm forever thankful. Bob grew spiritual hunger inside of me, and he created the environment within which I was able to start doing ministry. And for that, forever, I'm thankful.
Well, I appreciate your observation on the fact that his ministry was very, very powerful, and yet when people were growing in their faith, they would oftentimes gravitate toward another church. And sometimes, one of the things that and we're off the beaten path. We're going to get back on track here in a minute, but I think this is worth stating. I think it's important because so many times it's easy for us to get critical of someone else's ministry.
No doubt.
When oftentimes people are doing exactly what God wants them to do. They're filling an important role in the kingdom. And none of us are called to do the whole thing. None of us are called to reach the world, disciple the world, foretell the coming events, and fulfill every role. And I think it's pretty important that you were able to see that, and then you were
Well,
able to go to Willow Creek.
well,
Oh,
Mylon,
go
I'm
ahead.
not sure. I'm saying that now, way up the road. In the
Oh yeah.
middle of it, my wife and I, we would go to Calvary Chapel on Saturday night to get fed by Chuck Smith. And then we would come back, and serve at Garden Grove Community Church. There was a director of Christian education there named Ken Van Wyck, who was wonderful. And I went through like the Bethel training series with him. He really kind of fed me more. I didn't go to Sunday morning at Garden Grove Community Church to be fed. I really went to be inspired. And I mean, there's nothing evil about being inspired, but I grew to the point in my faith where I needed more. And, God provided other gifted men, like you said. And it's easy when you're young to become a little bit cynical and then to begin to judge Bob rather than, like you said, being mature enough to discern, listen, this is who this guy is. God's using him in a very unique way, just like you used Chuck Smith to birth Calvary Chapel in a very unique way, just like God used Chuck Swindoll in the Lord is in the church, and the mystery of giftedness and how the kingdom of God is built is much bigger than any of us. And, we can all think that we got to figure it out because we're in a certain position when it would be better to be a little more humble and a little more understanding.
Yeah. So you end up going to Willow Creek, which is, again, for anybody that doesn't know, in church world, that is like the biggest name of the late '80s and all of the '90s.
We had to run.
And you were there for a while, very, very successful there. And again, kind of like being successful as a basketball player, sitting on the bleachers, thinking about going home to your good-looking girlfriend and being greeted by all these fans. It feels empty. You're feeling another stage of emptiness, and I think it's fascinating. I have to ask you this: was it you that I was talking to, or it might have been another message I was listening to? It was about the fact that midlife is almost like a second set of teenage years, this time where we go through another time of just searching and saying, oh, wait a minute, who am I and what is my life about and all of this kind of stuff. But you find yourself being in a place where, as far as youth pastors were concerned, I mean, you couldn't have dreamed of any larger success, and yet here you are feeling like, okay, wait a minute, something's not right, or this isn't where I want to be right now. Or can you go into that a little bit more? Because I think you were in youth ministry, but whatever career we're in, whatever life path we're on, I do believe that this is a very common feeling at midlife. So dive into that a little bit, what you were feeling.
Well, it's interesting. Uh, um, one of the godfathers of leadership has said that really good leaders don't begin with the goal to become a great leader. They get clear on the work that is inside of them, and they put their head down and they do everything they can to develop that work. And along the way, they become leaders. And I think that's kind of what I did, is that I put my head down and I was about trying to figure out, how do I build a student ministry that can communicate the gospel to kids who do not know him? How do we do that? What is going to work? And yeah, I got as good as anyone in the country at it. And I didn't feel, I never felt arrogant about it because, we had 1,800 high school kids, and within 30 minutes of the church, there were 80,000 high school kids. And so, I mean, I just wanted to make the biggest contribution that I could. So, but what you're referring to here is, I think, here's kind of my conclusion, is that I think kind of in the first half, most of us are about the work. And when I talk about leadership today, I use the metaphor of a sailboat sitting on the water, because when you look at a sailboat upon the water, there's a seen part and there's an unseen part. There's an above the waterline part, the mast, the riggings, the grinders, and then there's the keel beneath the waterline, the bottom of the boat, which you can't see. And when I think the first half, not completely, but often much of the first half of our life is above the waterline, which is what I call the work of the work. It's trying to get clear concerning what is the work that has my name on it. What are my gifts and passions and interests? And how do I educate myself to make a contribution to unleash what God has put within me on the planet so that I can bear fruit, so that I can make a contribution? And so that's what I was doing. And in any vocation, when you get about getting hired, if your head's up and you want to grow as a person and as a professional, you realize in this specific vocation, whether I'm a cardiac surgeon or whether I lay brick or I put shingles on a roof or whether I direct student ministry, there's a set of fundamentals that I must identify and get better at to get better at my specific vocation. And so I got pretty clear on what the core fundamentals were during up until 40-ish or whatever, however you say that. And I locked in on those and I was able to teach those and I was able to apply those. I was able to live those out. And then, once I think very often, none of this are all in the statements, but these are general patterns. Sometime between 35 and 45, I believe that most of us, we've kind of sorted out with what our vocational skills and gifts are. We're making our contribution. And then for me, I believe that, and I kind of skidded into this thing called a stop sign, where what has given me joy in leading and expressing my gifts and skills above the waterline isn't enough anymore. It's like I've kind of reached a certain level of competence. And for me, what I awakened to was, what? God was opening the door through the pain and the frustration that I was feeling to enter a beneath the waterline, kind of below the waterline sailboat, and to address a whole different area of growth, which has to do with my soul, my character, my integrity. And that was a very confusing, painful transition that now I understand. I mean, a buddy and I have written a book called Unstuck, but I think my suspicion is, as I've navigated this and have taught a lot on this and create a little construct called a 6-phase construct of leader development, is that oftentimes, the first half is a lot about getting better at your job, not becoming a different kind of person.
Yeah. So you mentioned the stop sign. I want you to go into that a little bit. I mean, what stopped? I mean, what did it feel like the stop sign was doing to you? Was it changing the way you felt about your work, about failing, about your life, about all of that? And then you mentioned the pain there at the stop sign. Help us to maybe connect a little bit with where you were at, because I think that there's a lot of people who are feeling that. Maybe we haven't even paused long enough. Maybe we've blown through the stop sign. We haven't really stopped to think about it. But if we were, we'd be like, oh yeah, that's what I'm feeling. What was it for you?
Okay. As briefly as I can, if you think about my arm being the waterline, and you think about, like phases, like pie pieces that you go through. So I believe that, like if I stood here at the beginning, I went through what I call the excitement phase, which is all about energy to launch. That's getting hired in your vocation. And then before long in your vocation, you get exposed for, even though you may have a degree, a master's degree, a PhD, you get exposed for what you don't know. And then you enter what I call the fundamentals phase, which is where you must identify, what are the core skills that I need to develop in this vocation in order to move my company, my ministry ahead, and myself ahead professionally. And then after a period of time, this phase, this third pie piece phase, is what I call the contribution phase, which is where your gifts and talents are actually impacting the world. And then what for me, so that was like 20 years I'm doing this. And then my stop sign, which was right here, was, oh my gosh, I'm not energized, enthusiastic, or really thrilled about doing this work anymore. And if I was honest with myself, I found myself thinking about, and even talking with we would be in strategy meetings and I'd be bleeding, not physically, but I'd be bleeding emotionally, talking about my own discontent and confusion with my team. one of my staff guys, Bo, put his arm around me after a staff meeting. He says, dude, um, you're messed up right now. Why don't you take a month off and let me lead the ministry? And because you're running on 6 cylinders, we need you on all 8. And so, people around me who were sensitive noticed uh, that that I was I knew things were happening inside of me. For me to eventually come to the point to be honest enough with myself to say, I think I'm done with the run. Now I am absolutely terrified and fearful because what will happen in the future. I don't know what I want to do next. I've been a director of student ministry for 20 years. I don't think I ever can or want to do this anymore. Then what the heck am I going to do? And so that stop sign, you got kind of the 3 pie pieces. The stop sign opened the opportunity for me to go beneath the water line. And the first phase beneath the water line, you got 3 phases down here, boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
is misery. Yeah, baby.
So for everybody out there that's going, yeah, midlife feels a little miserable. When I was talking to you the other day, and whenever I have a guest on the show, we always have a, kind of a before the conversation, just kind of make sure that we're all, we understand where we're headed with this. And man, I was just feeling like, okay. And when we did our coaching, this was very, very helpful too.
Yeah, you know what
I felt like,
misery is
okay,
like.
I'm not crazy after all.
Yeah. No, I think it's very important to uh, that the purpose of a stop sign, I think, from God's perspective, is to get our attention. And oftentimes we don't pay attention until pain or misery comes. And J.R. Tolkien, who coined words, the Lord of the Rings guy, he coined a word called eucatastrophic. The Greek word "eu" is good. Like you give a eulogy, it's a good word. Well, he talked about a good catastrophe, eucatastrophic, and he said a good catastrophe is which, like a stop sign, clears the deck and enables you to look at maybe most important things that you are afraid to or you haven't looked at for a while. And so that stop sign, when I got honest about that, I realized I am miserable. So the purpose of the misery phase is to begin to identify what has happened to me, to ask what I call sacred questions. Like what has changed in me as I've aged? What's changed in my family? What's changed in my attitude towards work? What's happening inside of me as far as the things that are interesting to me? And for me, my misery was rooted in boredom, exhaustion, and disillusionment. Those were the 3 things. I was bored because a guy asked me, he says, hey, are you excited about giving a series on love, sex, and dating for, at Willow Creek for the 10th year in a row? You know, I just wanted to put a gun to my head. No, I'm not. I mean, those are very important and kids need to hear it, but do I want to do it for the 20th time? Not so much. I was bored because almost all of my relationships were downward. As far as I'm always discipling younger guys, younger men and women, I'm speaking to young kids, and there's certain energy there. But as far as peer relationships, where I was talking about life and all that kind of stuff in the future, not much of that was happening. So I was bored. I was tired because anybody in a people business like doing student ministry, I was given 2 messages a week, one on to kind of a non-believing high school audience, an outreach thing. And then I was given a message on Sunday night to our core. And I was discipling anywhere from 10 to 14 guys on Sunday morning, multiplying myself in them. And you're planning summer camps, you're planning winter camps. If you have a volunteer team of 220 people and 25% of them leave every year, you're trying to dig up another 25, 30, 40 volunteers. That's exhausting. I was exhausted just from the work of ministry, but I was also exhausted because I don't think you can get to midlife and not take emotional hits. My father has a heart attack and dies. One of the guys that I had discipled commits a minor moral indiscretion, so I got to take him in front of the elders. I mean, there were like 4 or 5 things that were like piling. You want to throw the yellow flag in the air, like this is a foul. And so I was exhausted and I was disillusioned because I had assumed, Mylan, that if I fulfilled God's call in my life, which was to build a student ministry to really help kids and then to be a model of inspiration to other ministries, if those two things could happen, I thought I would be the happiest guy on the planet, and I'm there and I'm not. And so I'm beginning to think, oh my gosh, what has happened to me? How does God feel about me? Um, and so that whole misery phase, bored, tired, disillusioned for me, led into what I call either the introspection phase or the renewal phase, where you answer those questions and you de-illusionize your life. You begin to ask yourself, why am I not the most fulfilled person? What really did motivate me to do ministry? Because I had always assumed that it was just the fuel line of the altruistic love of God plugged into my soul that motivated me. And I realized, no, man, there's all sorts of contaminated motivation lines that you got to snip off and change. I realized my interests had changed. I realized that I had gone from being a beginning to a veteran, and I had to sort through all that stuff. And I began to read everything I could about midlife crisis and to begin to figure out what had happened. And it took embarrassingly longer than I thought it could. I mean, I thought, man, I can just read a book. I can, go get counseling 5 or 6 sessions. It took 18 months to sort that
Yeah.
thing out.
Well, and you mentioned the other day when we were talking that your response to truth, you talked about your response to truth or our response to truth. When truth comes knocking,
Yeah.
how the way that we respond has a tremendous impact on how
That's,
this journey through
yeah.
halftime goes.
Yeah. Um, I think our personal development, certainly our leadership development, is what could be called contextual, which means that you plop us into our life and we carry responsibility. And sooner or later, our breakups in our makeup surface, the immaturities that we have, the woundedness that we have, we're all bruised, dinged, scarred from our family of origin, no matter how good it was. And so when we get exposed for something we don't know or someone that we aren't, we get exposed for what we don't know skill wise above the waterline. We get exposed for who we aren't character wise beneath the waterline. Then, it's like truth comes knocking on our forehead. And right here in front of us is an area of needed development, either professionally or in our spirit, in our character. And Henry Cloud, a great Christian psychologist in Southern California, says that if we look at what is being revealed about us and we blame other people, we pretend it's not there, or we make excuses for it, then what we do is we kind of push it aside. And Cloud says that we take a step in this direction towards becoming a less integrous man or woman, a less trustworthy man or woman, a worse leader, not a better leader. And Cloud says, on the other hand, if when truth comes knocking on our forehead, and this is, I think, an important thing to think about, we realize that, like if we're getting feedback from people that is painful, I think we have to have a strong enough backbone to admit, listen, everybody has an opinion about everything, including me and what I do. And so maybe 50% of this is their observation and opinion that's got nothing to do with my personal growth. Now, if I don't have a strong enough backbone, I can just acquiesce and collapse to that kind of input. But if I have a strong enough backbone, I can say, listen, I appreciate the fact that you've got an opinion. I'm not really concerned about that. What I want to hear is the voice of God here. And so maybe 50% of this, God is saying, hey, pay attention to this. Cloud says that if we don't make excuses or pretend it's not there, but if we embrace it, then this is a wonderful line. We metabolize that truth into our character and we move that direction and we become a more trustworthy person, a more trustworthy leader, a more integrous woman or man. And I think that is incredibly profound. And so these life circumstances, we're doing this. And was this professional development? Was this character development? What was going on? And to rally the courage to put it on the table and to admit it to my direct report, my boss, and then to sit down with a Christian psychologist and say, is this a family of origin wound? What's happened here? And to sort through that and to begin to read about, is this something that that God uses? Does he cause? I don't know. Does life just get us to this point where this kind of misery and stop sign then opens us to the possibility that there could be a whole new expression of the layers of life experience that we've learned in the future to be able to make a different contribution than we did in the first half. I mean, I get it now, but boy, I didn't then. I didn't have the maturity then.
Yeah. So when truth comes knocking, though, uh, a lot of times we try to avoid it. We try to stuff it away. We try to get around it. We try different things. Why do you think we do that? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? Why do we do those things?
Well, um, oftentimes the courage to uh, uh, living with a habitual attitude towards I want to learn. I come into every day and I want to learn. That's a challenge, and to be humble enough. I think sometimes pride does it. Sometimes woundedness keeps us from. Sometimes the challenge of growth, because if you think, like beginning, enthusiastic, the energy, this phase, contribution phase, stop sign. When you think about, okay, am I going to have the courage to really open the door for personal growth here and to really face what's going on inside of me and to heal wounds, to de-illusionize, to get clear on what I'm really about, what I really believe? Um, that is frightening. And there are many, many people who hit this stop sign, and rather than listening to the thump on the forehead, what they do is they say, I don't want to go there. And they run back to the beginning phase, the excitement phase, and they get another job or they take another challenge and they bring again all that's going on inside of them, but they're able to bury that. And then I talked with one woman who told me her husband did that stop sign 3 times. And the fourth time, he is finally, he changed jobs the first time. The second time, he built a vacation home. The third time, he bought a Corvette, to kind of irrigate the pain. And the fourth time, he said, okay, now I'm humble enough. Now, humility, to have the kind of humility to risk vulnerability. Humility creates space inside of us for growth. Pride, insecurity fills space. And so at that point, if we don't have models that have told us, hey, listen, what you're going through, you're not crazy. This can be used for good. I'm just not blowing sunshine at you. And this is purposeful. If you will stop cursing it and if you will become curious, and if you develop enough humility and curiosity to begin to think about, okay, what is God saying to me? What do I need to learn? What lessons do I carry from the first half? How could this be shaped and fashioned into something that could allow me to touch the planet maybe in a different way in the second half? I mean, it's challenging. It's scary. We don't see it often. We don't get it modeled, and so a lot of us just live in that pain and end up getting addicted. There is a amazing verse in the book of Ecclesiastes that says, the mind of the wise, it's Ecclesiastes 7, the mind of the wise is in the house of mourning. The mind of the fool is in the house of pleasure. And so Solomon knew that, when we hit these challenging times, we can run down the well-worn road to the house of pleasure, and you can, get addicted to purchasing, you buying, you can get in debt, you can, have affairs, you can get addicted to all sorts of chemicals and stuff like that. And now you've got 2 problems. You've got your initial problem and you've got an addiction. Instead of, as Solomon says, the mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, sit at the feet of your own pain and invite Jesus, the man acquainted with our griefs, into our pain and trusted people, and to begin to sort this thing out and grow. It benefits you, it benefits your spouse, your kids, the contribution. I mean, everything gets better when we mature and grow, but it's a choice that we make, and not everybody is willing to. Some people have got to, some people should wake up now, and they're going to wake up 4 years from now.
Yeah. Well, and my hope is that this podcast will hit people where they're at, and I know for me, I needed permission. I needed somebody to tell me it's okay to feel what you're feeling. It's okay to be in that pain. By the way, everybody goes through it. It normalized it a little bit. So rather than being afraid of it and wanting to run back, it was like, okay, I can deal with this. I can process this. And again, our faith has a huge, is a huge part of that. If we don't have a strong foundation, then fear just terrorizes
So
us.
true. When I
Yeah.
was in kind of the renewal introspection phase, for 20 years, I taught teenagers, listen, God loves you, period. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what condition you're in. His love transcends any of the things that we do. And I taught that for 20 years. When I am in a place where I don't know if I ever want to do ministry again, I don't want to know if I ever can do ministry again, all of a sudden I'm thinking, uh, God, is what I taught for 20 years really true for me? And are you truly? And I was blown away by the kindness of God in what I was going through, and a sense of feeling His understanding. When we get physically dizzy, people will say, "Listen, sit down and regain your equilibrium." You go through this, you feel vocationally, emotionally, spiritually, you feel dizzy. And so rather than continuing to run down the road, there's a discipline. Listen, sit down, slow down, begin to talk honestly, risk vulnerability with people that you trust, begin to read about things, you know, uh, journal. There's tons of podcasts where you can listen to other people like this who have gone through these things and to begin to sort out, okay, what are the things that God is trying to mature me in? What are the lessons I can take from the first half? How might how I have grown result in a whole different contribution up the road that I could never see in the first half? So there's some disciplines to this, to have the kind of courage and humility to shut the engine down for a while. And for me, I still had to do ministry while I was trying to sort this out. But I told Don, my direct report, I said, Don, listen, I cannot carry any more responsibility than I'm right now. I will get my ministry over the next 6 months to the finish line, the 10-year mark, and you just have to give me some breath here right now. I need to spend 80% of my time fulfilling the work that you're paying me for, and I got to spend 20% of the time trying to sort out what the heck's going on inside of me. And thankfully, I had an understanding enough boss in Don Cousins that he said, I get it, and be responsible, but try to begin to figure out what's going on. And man, if you have a boss or somebody like that that's understanding, if you now, listen, I for 10 years, I had I was a peak performer. I had crushed it for 10 years. So after 10 years to be able to say to Don, is it okay if I back up a little bit? Well, yeah. If I had been there 3 months and I went and I said, hey, I'm fatigued. Well, there's a different deal there. So if you've been a contributor in your work, and you have proven your value, then for you to go hopefully to your boss, if he or she is, sensitive, to be able to say, listen, I'm in some inner turmoil and I need a little bandwidth here to be able to do this. Can I leave an early hour on Thursday because I want to sit down with a therapist and talk, or whatever? You try to figure out, how do you negotiate it without losing your job so you can still have a paycheck, but how can you begin the healing process?
Yeah. Now, yeah, I mentioned earlier in the episode that you are my coach, and I'm very, very thankful for the way that you helped me, and you were very kind and very gentle, and helped me to look at the right things and think about the right things. And part of that process, um, you called it listening to your life. And I think that's one thing when we're above the waterline, right? When we're working on our work, when we're going after it, building the family, building the career, doing all that stuff, we don't really pause and listen to our life. And maybe that stop sign is that thing that says stop. Your life is trying to tell you something.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that idea
A
of
little
listening
bit.
to life a little bit? Why that's so important?
One of the books I read during that time is a small book by Parker Palmer, who is an educational activist in Madison, Wisconsin, called Let Your Life Speak. And Parker taught me the principle of listening to your life. And so when I talk to leaders, I try to say, listen, where there are certain things that you can grow in the fundamentals above the waterline, but the place often at which God is growing us is where we are bumping into life. And so, where are you bumping into life? Many times we're bumping into life above the waterline because we have a huge project at work or some initiative or something like that. And that's where we're bumping in. That's a place of growth. Sometimes we're bumping into life because all of a sudden we begin to feel, wait a second, my something's happened to the intimacy with my spouse. I feel distant, or my wife is shut down. What's going on there? So I'm bumping into life there. Sometimes you bump into life because your 15-year-old son gets arrested for possession of marijuana on the high school campus. That's a bump. So that's a wake-up call. And so I try to help leaders, and Parker helped me say, listen to your life. Create some kind of discipline daily, weekly, where you take some time and you reflect, okay, where are the hot spots of my life? Where are the challenges? Where am I bumping into life, both in my skill development and in my character? Where am I? Because every good, my thing is leadership development. Every good leadership development process it's always both end. There are areas of skill development, competence above the waterline, and there's areas of character growth beneath the waterline, and how to relate to people, how to lead my own life, how to build a team. I mean, all these things are intermingled. And so, somewhere along the line, to not ignore, even sometimes listening to your life, is to realize, I have heartburn every night for like the last 14 days, and I'm getting tired of eating Tums. Maybe something's happening inside my body. I mean, you coach people all the time on just not on on this level. You coach them on their physical level. Your body is talking to you all the time, about different things. And so I think that mature leaders, they pay attention to that stuff. And that is definitely that was a skill that I needed to learn. And Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak, was really helpful in kind of leading me down the path. And since then, I have created, certain journaling disciplines where I pay attention to where I'm bumping into life. And I try to listen to my conscience, and I try to listen to the voice of God. And I try to listen to brothers and sisters that love me that might say, hey, are you thinking about this? You thinking about that? And there are a couple things that I'm bumping into. I'm bumping into a couple things right now that are really almost too confidential for me just to throw out here on this podcast. But they're as real as the things, 30 years ago when I was going through what I was going through then. That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, and as a coach, I know you meet with a lot of people, and I'm sure sometimes people come to you for coaching, and they think that they're going to get coaching in one area, and you end up realizing that what's really causing the problems or needs to be dealt with is over in a different area of life. And I think, a lot of times in midlife, that's the thing. We've spent all of our time focusing in certain areas, and it's the pain from something else in life that comes up and bites us in the butt and starts to facilitate this midlife crisis, if you will. Do you see that happening with your clients? And
Sure.
And what are some of those things that you guys you find yourself dealing with people?
Yeah,
with?
life is an amazingly wonderful, complex thing. And, there are 1,000 different circumstances that can cause a person to want to pursue. Most of the time, I would say, most of the time people will come to me when they are at a stop sign or they're miserable and they haven't been able to trust another person enough to be able to be completely transparent and to try to get to the core of the issue. Most of the time professionally, that's what's going on. I do far more life coaching than I do like specific vocational coaching. Now, out of life coaching may come a vocational change, but I'm trying to help a person, live the life that they're meant to live, which means managing their heart, managing who they are becoming, manages the kind of parent they are, the kind of spouse they are, the kind of community member they are, the kind of employee they are, or owner of a company or whatever it is. I mean, I'm more about wholeness than I am just about specific vocational issues. There are, people that'll come to me who have been in the marketplace and they're restless and they're thinking maybe God's calling them into ministry. I have people come to me in ministry who there's not a specific crisis. They're just thinking, I think I'm tired of carrying the pulpit every week, and I think I might like to do something else. Can you help me sort out who I am and what I might be able to do next? Some people, a lot of people who just want a lunch with me or something like that. It could be, listen, my son's an alcoholic. My daughter told me that she's gay, and I'm not sure exactly how to navigate that. Oftentimes, it's some kind of this at real time in their life rather than some really whole life complicated issue. And then just trying to meet people where they are. And, a lot is trying to engender enough trust in them that they can talk honestly about what they're really feeling and not feel like they're judged, and rather try to listen to what's going on and then to grow from that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a complicated process, and there's no easy way through it. I think that's, part of the power of coaching is that you really need a thought partner. You need somebody to kind of come alongside and say, hey, I'm going to pick this burden up with you. Let's carry it together. Let's move forward together.
Yeah.
Because
that is to bear one another's burdens, admonition, no doubt.
Yeah. And I've the more I'm into this, the more I'm realizing it's not a formula. There's not a hey, by the way, here's what you do to get through midlife. It really is it's a stopping, it's feeling the pain, it's listening to your life, it's being willing to respond to truth appropriately. I think was it Henry Cloud who said when truth comes knocking, just say thank you.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to argue or fight it.
Yeah, exactly.
When people bring truth, just say thank you.
Thank you. Instead of complaining or blaming. Let me let me try to give hope. I'll give you a closing story here.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful story in a book about I think it's by Sue Monk Kidd, where she talks about growing up in the South, and they would go to her grandmother's house, during the summer, and she had two older brothers, and she had a nanny whose name was Sweet. I can just visualize this beautiful woman. And one day, at her grandmother's house, her brothers come running in the house and run into the kitchen and say to Sweet, "We found a puddle with 1,000 tadpoles out there." And so Sweet takes 3 mason jars, taps some holes in the lids, and gives it to the older boys and gives one to Sue, who is a younger girl. And the 2 boys run out the door, and Sue's running towards the front door. And her grandmother says, Sue, where are you going? What are you doing? And Sue says, "I'm running out to play in the mud." And her grandmother says, no, honey, little girls don't do that. You come sit at the piano and I'll teach you a song. And so she's such a brilliant writer. She talks about her hands being on the piano and her heart being in the mud outside. And so that's a beautiful thing. And then she says the next week, she said one of the things that would happen during the summer is that Sweet would take me to the park, which I'd walk out the front door, and 4 blocks straight ahead was a park, and we'd go there and she would swing me. And she communicates, it's just a beautiful memory. So she said the next week, Sweet says, "Okay, let's walk to the park." And my brothers aren't part of this. So I walk out the front door with Sweet, and Sweet says, "Honey, let's walk to the park the long way around today." And she said, being 8, 9, 10 years old, I was impatient, but I loved this woman. So I said, okay. So she said, we take a hard right turn and we walk 1 block that way, 2 blocks that way. And she writes, I'm about ready to explode on this woman. And we cross the street and she wants to hang another right. And she pauses. And I said, Sweet. And she says, Sue, come here. So I walk over to her and she says, look down. And there's a wheelbarrow full of water with 1,000 tadpoles in it. And she pulls a mason jar from underneath her apron and she hands it to me. And for the next half an hour, I'm lost in the wonder. And the next line in the book, Mylan, caused me to cry because I was right in the middle, man, of it all. And the next line she says, that was the day I learned that there ain't no tadpoles unless you go the long way around. And because you hit midlife and you assume your life is going to go boom, 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 boom. And then does God ever do that? Doesn't he always take us the long way around? And I think of the tadpoles that came to my life, the lessons that I learned, the people that I met, the friendships that I developed, the change in vocation that God directed me to. These were graces. These tadpoles could be graces that only came because of, God given me the grace to navigate that. And I would have lost it. And so for any of you who are in the middle, listen, there ain't no tadpoles unless you go the long way around. And I think that's such a great little picture to remember, even in the middle of this. And when you get a tadpole of grace, you get a glimmer, record that thing and know that, listen, there's one more coming. There's another one coming.
Yeah. I mean, I can, when I think of my own, processing midlife, from that perspective, I hear, be still and know that I am God.
Yep. Yep. I mean,
too many times we think we got it figured out.
Yeah. If we were still, we'd actually hear from God.
Yeah. That might be something that you just gotta, whenever you're feeling the anxiety, whenever you're feeling the pain, whenever feeling like you're at the stop sign, it's just good to go, be still, know that he is God. Yeah. He's got this. We're going to be okay. So you're a coach, but you do other stuff as well. Could you tell us just real briefly, the other stuff that you're into? What else? What are the projects you got that you're working on?
Yeah. Being 72, my ministry's kind of starting to taper a little bit. Mm-hmm. I don't do a ton of speaking outside. There's a ministry called Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And for years, they onboard new staff. They have, I think 5,000 staff internationally now. And 3 times a year in Kansas City at their support center, they do an onboarding of new staff called training camp. And I do the first 2 mornings. I do 4 sessions with every new staff person for FCA on leadership of the heart. And that is a huge grace. And then Buddy and I have also created an emerging leaders program for kind of their top leaders that we've taken 3 different groups through. It's a 4 retreat approach where we do a retreat on lead self, 1 on lead team, 1 on lead others, 1 on lead organization. And Randy Gravitt and I have done that. We've written a couple of books together. And so I probably give FCA and the different things that spark from that, as far as I'll go in and I'll do a 3-state training for somebody. That's probably 30 or 40% of my work. And then the other, maybe another 30 or 40% are the different coaching relationships that I have, the intensive things that I do. I don't, travel a ton to speak. I used to speak all time, all over the place. And so probably 30, 40% with FCA, 30, 40% of coaching. And then I'm giving 20% of my life to my wife right now, where I am right now. And she's not physically hindered in any way, but I'm trying to honor the woman who's given me 5 decades of her life. And so given where we are with the health that we have, I'm not retired, but I'm kind of tapered. And so I'm doing a lot of things with my wife to honor her and the contribution, because it hasn't always been easy being my wife, that's for sure.
Well, I really respect you, and I appreciate the things that we've been able to work through. You've been a great coach for me. Are you looking for any more clients? Do you want to put your information out there? Or are you kind of like, I'm good right now? Where are you at with that?
I have the privilege. I am not, one of the things, Smiling, that I don't work real hard at building my platform. I don't advertise myself. God seems to bring people, the right people that my unique gifts and abilities are able to serve to me. And so, I'm someone up the road who's listening to this podcast and they're saying, I think I'm at a place of readiness where a process could be helpful. Then absolutely. Yeah. Give me a call, send me a text, shoot me an email. And if I'm not the right person to help, then let's find the right person to help that, you move into the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Authentic Leadership is the name of your own personal ministry.
Authentic Leadership Inc. is the nonprofit that my wife and I started 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And you can get to me through danwebster.com. We'll get you to authentic. You can either do authenticleadershipinc.com or danwebster.com. That'll get you to, my website. And,
Yeah.
you can email me through that.
Well, Dan, I'm tempted to keep going with this with lots more questions.
Let's
Partially
do another
because,
one sometime. Let's do another one.
well, I was going to say partially because I felt like we went through so much stuff when you were coaching me, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you and your role of leadership as a mentor in my life. You were incredibly helpful, and I know you're like a fountain of wisdom. You still have a whole lot more to share that we haven't even touched on today. But it
Listen,
is
buddy,
time to kind of wrap this up.
let me I appreciate that. I'm
Yeah.
grateful for your affirmation, your love, and I'm really thankful that by God's grace I was able to help you navigate some of
Yeah.
that really painful time. How fun would it be sometime if we could do a training or a workshop of what a coaching relationship looks like and
Yeah.
talk about midlife? Maybe God will provide an opportunity somewhere up the road. But I'm exceedingly proud of your courage, Mylan. I mean, you got sucker punched and you were dizzy for a while, and it took you a while to navigate all that stuff, but you did. You had the courage to look beyond that to what is God doing in me? What is God saying to me right now? And even this podcast that you're just starting, I think of all of the different people and leaders that are going to benefit and grow because you had the courage to navigate your pain. So I'm really proud of you too, but I count you as a good friend.
Well, thank you, Dan. Yeah, we may very well have to pick this conversation up another time and do another episode together.
Good. I'd love to.
Well, thank you so much again for your time, and love and appreciate you as a friend and as a mentor, and appreciate you being on my show today.
You bet, buddy. Anytime.
All right. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Man, what a great conversation that was. I hope that you gleaned some really helpful advice, insights, as Dan really shared his heart about going through his own midlife transition. Lots and lots of people are going through this, and there's lots and lots of guests that I have to share their story and their insights with us. And I'm really, really thankful for that. I'm thankful for Dan being willing to give his time and his energies to us in this process today. I do want to encourage you to reach out to our Facebook group, the Halftime Facebook group, where you'll find more conversation. You'll find clips from this episode and others, and you'll also find some helpful tools, tips, tricks, things like that. And it's a great place for our growing community to connect online. I also want to invite you to just continue to pray for this podcast. As we grow, I want to continue to do what God wants me to do, share these great conversations, my own personal insights, and hopefully give you and many others a space to kind of process what it means to go through midlife. Want to encourage you to continue to lean in. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to this podcast, whether it be on Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube. Make sure you don't miss any episodes. And of course, whenever you can, throw out a comment or a like or something like that. Kind of helps to grow this channel as well. Thanks again for tuning in today, and God bless you this week and in your own midlife journey.